For a bomber expected to fly into gunfire, the Heinkel He 111 had a strange place to put its crew, behind a wall of glass. By the Second World War, the aircraft had become a familiar shape over Europe. It attacked cities, railways, airfields, and military positions while facing anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters. Yet the front of the airplane looked almost exposed on purpose. The nose was covered with large, transparent panels. The pilot sat inside that glazed section, with other crew members working only a few feet away. Compared with bombers such as the B-17 or Lancaster, the HE-111 seemed to push its crew right toward the danger. If enemy fighters were firing directly at the front of the aircraft, why would German engineers surround the crew with glass? Because that glass was solving several problems at once. To see why, it helps to look at the HE-111 before its famous nose existed. Let's get into it right here on Small Things. The He-111 didn't always look like this. Early He-111s looked far more conventional. They used a stepped cockpit with the pilot sitting higher and farther back while the bombardier occupied a lower position toward the front. Seen from the side, the cockpit formed a clear break in the aircraft's outline. It worked, but it divided the crew into separate viewing positions. The pilot looked out from one level. The bombardier worked from another. What each man could see depended heavily on where he sat. With the He-111P, Heinkel moved in a different direction. The step disappeared. In its place came a rounded, extensively glazed nose that blended into the fuselage. The same layout continued on the more numerous HE-111H series. This changed more than the appearance of the airplane. Several crew positions now shared one forward space with a much wider view of the sky and ground. That mattered in the late 1930s because many jobs inside a bomber still depended on looking outside. Electronics could help, but they had not replaced human eyes. And the man who depended on them most was not the pilot. He was working almost at the very tip of the airplane. The man who had to see the target. Picture the final approach to a bombing target. The target may appear only briefly in the correct part of the view. There is no digital map telling the crew exactly where to release. The bombardier has to see the ground, identify what matters, and make the last decisions before the bombs fall. On the He-111, he worked near the extreme nose, often lying or kneeling while looking forward and downward through the glazing. In front of him was the German Lofte bomb site. A bridge, factory, railway junction, airfield, or concentration of troops could be the objective. The bombardier had to pick it out from everything around it, follow the approach, judge alignment, and help make final corrections before release. A few small windows in a metal nose would have made that job harder. The glazed nose opened exactly the area he needed to see. For him, the glass was effectively part of the targeting system. That is the most important reason the He-111 looked the way it did. The smooth shape later brought an aerodynamic benefit too, but the immediate operational value was much simpler. The bombardier could see the target. Still, finding the target was only the last step. First, the crew had to find its way there. Before GPS, the ground was part of the navigation system. A few feet away, another crewman was looking through the same glass for something completely different. The bombardier wanted to know where the target was. The navigator needed to know where the airplane was. There was no satellite navigation. Crews worked with maps, compasses, stopwatches, dead reckoning, limited radio navigation equipment, and landmarks on the ground. Rivers, coastlines, railway lines, roads, and towns became reference points. From the glazed nose, the navigator could compare those features with the planned route and repeatedly check the bomber's position. That mattered over familiar territory. Over places such as the Soviet Union or the deserts of North Africa, it could become critical. A small navigational error could grow over distance, taking the aircraft away from its target or forcing it to burn fuel correcting the route. A bomber that arrived late or from the wrong direction had a new problem. A bomber that used too much fuel might have an even bigger one. In that world, the ground itself became part of the navigation system, and the same visibility that helped the navigator also changed what the pilot could do. Why the pilot sat inside the glass? The redesigned He 111 placed the pilot directly inside the glazed nose, slightly to the left of the center line. It was an unusual seating position, but the view ahead and below was broad. That helped during takeoff and landing, when seeing the runway and judging the aircraft's attitude mattered most. It also became useful during low-level flight, where terrain and obstacles could rush toward the airplane with little warning. Later in the war, German crews sometimes flew closer to the ground to reduce their exposure to Allied radar and fighter interception during anti-shipping attacks and supply flights. At those heights, a clear view of the horizon and terrain was more than a comfort. The offset seat could feel strange at first, but pilots learned to work with it. The glazing helped one more man in the nose as well. A forward-mounted machine gun allowed the nose gunner to fire at fighters approaching head-on, and the transparent panels made it easier to spot and track an aircraft moving across the front of the bomber. So the nose was doing more than letting one crewman see better. It created a shared working space built around observation. Then another advantage entered the picture: speed. There was another reason: speed. The old stepped cockpit broke up the front of the aircraft. The rounded replacement gave air a smoother shape to flow around, fitting the late 1930s obsession with streamlined airplanes. Of course, the nose did not make the He 111 fast by itself. Engines, weight, wings, and the rest of the airframe mattered far more, but removing the steps supported the same goal. And at the time, speed looked like protection. During the Spanish Civil War, early He 100s and 11s proved fast enough to outrun some contemporary fighters. Experiences like that encouraged a powerful assumption: if a bomber could stay fast enough, enemy fighters might struggle to catch it before it reached safety. That made the trade-off in the nose easier to accept. Less protection did not automatically look foolish if the aircraft was expected to spend less time within reach of enemy guns. The design reflected the threat its engineers expected to face. For a while, that expectation looked reasonable. Then, fighter performance improved. When the advantage became a liability, by the Battle of Britain in 1940, Hurricanes and Spitfires could intercept He 111 formations. The bomber could no longer count on speed to keep fighters at a distance. Once they closed in, the glass nose looked very different. The same panels that gave the crew such a wide view offered little protection from concentrated gunfire. Perspex and glass could shatter. Fragments could injure the men behind them. A head-on attack was especially dangerous because several crew positions were concentrated near the front. German engineers responded as the threat grew. Armor appeared around parts of the cockpit. More defensive guns were added in the upper fuselage, the ventral gondola, and side positions to cover attacks from multiple directions. Those changes helped, but they were being added to an aircraft whose basic concept came from an earlier stage of aviation. The gap kept widening. Later, Allied fighters such as the Spitfire Mark IX and P-51 Mustang brought greater speed and heavier firepower. The He 111 could be modified, but its fundamental layout could not be redesigned every time the battlefield changed. That is what makes the nose so interesting. The glass had not suddenly become a bad idea. the world around it had changed. A feature that once helped the crew find targets, navigate, fly low, and watch for danger now also exposed them to threats that had become faster and harder to avoid. And even when no fighter was nearby, the glass brought problems of its own. The less dramatic problems of a glass cockpit. A glazed nose was not always a pleasant place to work. In strong sunlight, the transparent panels could trap heat like a greenhouse. In winter, the same large surface made the cockpit difficult to keep warm, especially during long missions over Northern Europe or the Soviet Union. Then, there was maintenance. The nose was built from multiple shaped panels of perspex and glass held in metal frames. If one was damaged, ground crews could not always solve the problem with a simple flat replacement. The new piece had to match the original shape to fit. These problems were less dramatic than incoming gunfire, but they reveal something useful about the design. Every advantage came with a cost that had to be accepted somewhere else. By the standards of the late 1930s, the He 111's glass nose made sense. Visibility was still doing jobs that electronics would later take over. Human eyes helped locate targets, confirm routes, judge terrain, and watch the air ahead. A smoother nose also fitted the wider effort to keep the bomber fast. Then, aerial warfare changed faster than the aircraft could. Radar improved. Interceptors became faster. Their weapons became more destructive. The bomber that had been designed around speed and observation now had to survive in an environment where neither offered the same protection as before. That does not make the original design foolish. It makes it a snapshot of the problems engineers thought they were solving at the time. Engineering is always a trade-off between what a machine needs to do and what its designers expect it to face. Change the threat, and the same feature can take on a completely different meaning. The He 111's glass nose was not proof that its designers ignored danger. It was proof that even a clever solution can become vulnerable when the problem changes faster than the machine does. If a design like this can change meaning so completely in just a few years, imagine how many other familiar machines are hiding the same kind of story. If you enjoy finding the reasons behind details that are easy to overlook, subscribe to SST. And let us know in the comments, what other aircraft feature have you always wondered about?